The world is changing. It used to be that you could identify with other people by what you stood against. You were anti this, you were anti that. For example, the left once was anti racism, anti discrimination, or at least the perception of those things. It used to be, furthermore, that the left was anti big government. How that's changed. It used to be that the right was anti-union, anti-freedom of expression. And these are the organizing principles of the political left and the political right. I also want to dial that down to parenting. How so often parents with their children are anti-alcohol and drugs underage, anti having a boyfriend, having a girlfriend until a certain age. Rules, these are the things that you're not to do. Well, being a hypnotist and studying the Hypnotic Suggestions and Metaphors Handbook, we learn that when you see that word, imagery, when you focus your organizing principles, your orientation in a relationship, what you stand for, what you're about, what motivates you to action, if you organize around what you're not, what are you going to get? You're going to get more of, because you are creating imagery and visualizations around the things that you do not want. The outcome of that is going to be you get more of it. If you're constantly telling your children not to engage in premarital relations and how important it is not to do it, well, two things is going to happen. The first thing is going to be obsessed with premarital relations. It's going to be the foremost thing in their mind. That's going to be the first thing. And if you understand the process of adolescence and development, there is a necessary independence that is created from when the child goes from being a child with parents to being an independent adult. That period is adolescence. A child becomes a young man or young woman at age 12. And that is when it is necessary to begin independent assertion of one's own identity in the world. Of course, learning, this used to be in the context of apprenticeship for boys and for men, and for women it used to be somewhat similar, but the female version. Men would enter into the patriarchal system, and women would enter into a matriarchal system, right? Whenever people complain about the patriarchy, what they are really complaining about is feminism. Did you know that? Second wave feminism said that the best version of a woman is a man. And therefore, women need to wear pantsuits. Women need to do everything that men can do because they can do it better. They should do it better. Women need to have men's jobs. That was second wave feminism, beginning in the 1960s and 70s. Women should sleep around like men do. Women should have all the same positions in society that men do. Now, what did this mean? This was a rejection of the matriarchy, of the hierarchy of feminine competence within the home and hearth that had been known for 200,000 approximately years. Completely rejected that. And so all that's left now are both men and women in a man's world and the destruction of a woman's world. That's tragic. That's tragic. And so what we got was what we didn't want. We no longer have flourishing between the sexes and of the genders themselves, within them. Men don't know how to be men and women don't know how to be women. But if we focus on what we don't want in that, for that particular social issue, we're going to get more of it. If you tell your kids what you don't want them to do, you're going to have them be focused on that and trying to find loopholes and perform rule breaking around that, which I don't think is what you want. I think you want happy, I think you want healthy, I think you want successful people who are dedicated to being the best version of themselves, who they are. Not being yourself, but being the best version of yourself. And that is what adolescence ought to be. And so often you'll know as I talk about professional persuasion, I talk about political persuasion, but I also like to talk about interpersonal persuasion, persuasive parenting, and focusing on what you want your kids to do so that you are known as 80% what to do, 20% what not to do, as opposed to authoritarian parenting, which is 80% what not to do, 20% to do instead. And so they're focusing on battling their young people because as they are finding their own separate identity, the only identity available to them that's separate from their parents is doing what the parents do not want them to do. Do you understand that? Teenage rebellion is an invention of the last couple of decades. Teenagers didn't used to rebel, but there is an over-reliance on Puritanism, on, I would say, modesty maxing, purity culture. And there's not anything wrong with purity or with modesty or with any of those things. But you'll notice if the focus is on what not to do, what you can't say, what you can't show, what you can't be, but you can't do any of those, the only alternative is the extreme version of those. So instead of beautiful, gracious, feminine dress for girls, there's either basically wearing pajamas in public that are way too big or dressing wildly inappropriately. And those are the two options that are available, not actually dressing in a feminine way. I think with boys, it's even worse because you don't typically see young men in public wearing the equivalent of a sexy dress for young women, which would be suit and tie. You don't even see that. You just see men dressing like, I don't know, slobs, I suppose. It's a sort of people of Walmart-ization of the public domain, of the town square. I think this is avoidable and this is undoable. But what is it that we want? We are seeing organizations like Evie Magazine with their they had a fantastic sundress, and they just released a Milkmaid dress, they're calling it. And of course, they're getting crapped on by, I would say, the modesty maxers and purity culturists, where the focus is on, oh, look how low that neckline is. Like, okay, you don't have to buy it. Like, that's how the model looks. You could wear an undershirt with it if you want to. Like, that's really common. So what exactly are we complaining about here? It's okay for women to be beautiful. It's okay for men to be handsome. And so if we reject handsomeness as you look like you're in Mad Men, and if we reject feminine beauty as, well, that's immodest because you look beautiful and maybe a little sexy, which is too sexy, you need to unsexify yourself. We have this sort of transing of us all, where being androgynous is what is the only thing that is acceptable, where men don't dress like men and women don't dress like women. We also see that in the roles of society, where men are doing more things that are women associated and women doing things that are more men associated, which, by the way, is third wave feminism, which is women in second wave feminism removed men from men's spaces and made them co-ed. So that was the elimination of men-only spaces. That's how we ultimately reached Boy Scouts having Girl Scouts. But Girl Scouts don't have Boy Scouts, of course. That's only fair. And then third wave feminism is, well, there's no difference between men and women. They're basically the same, so men should do women's things. This is where we get the language like birthing person and chest feeding. These sorts of things, this sorts of language. Language reflects reality, the movements of reality. So this is why I want you to pay careful attention to language people are choosing to use, because it's reflective of greater trends and greater movements, what's happening. And this is the trend we're seeing third wave and now fourth wave feminism, which is, first it was like men and women can do the same things. That was third wave feminism. Fourth wave feminism is really there's not any difference between men and women biologically, like at all. And this is where you see gender is like it's a spectrum. There's one end to one end. Identity is one end. People will say things like LGBs are born this way, but Ts are not. Well, does gender have a biological basis? Does sexuality have a biological basis or not? Yes and no, they shout at the same time. Yes for those people, but no for not for these people. Okay, so there is inherent disagreement around these definitions and around these words. And that's by design, of course. There's been great confusion cast on the roles of men and women. And if you want to be maximally persuasive in our day and age, you simply need to get noticed. A slender, fit, long-haired, beautiful, feminine woman, everyone notices. Everyone stops, drops, and rolls over to pay attention to that woman. If you want to be maximally persuasive as a woman, be the best version of yourself that is that. And similarly for men, if you want to be noticed, be maximally masculine, and what that looks like for you. Because in a fourth wave feminist androgynous age where there are no women and there are no men, and we're even seeing children's names being used that are more and more common that are like, well, that could be for boys, that could be for girls, like Alex, for example. You see a lot of names chosen like that. Chris, C-R-I-S. More and more we're seeing names like that. Hayden. You have no idea what that even is. We're also seeing strange names that you're not typically seeing, like naming a child Winter. Like, okay. Naming things after objects, like gems, for example, where there's further and further disassociation from the traditional feminine and the traditional masculine. The Lindy aspects of those. So there's a lot we've covered here. The key point that I want to bring up is social conservatives tend to be against things, as do social liberals. And they focus on what they don't want, and they end up getting more of it, more of what they don't want. So do parents as well with your children. So if we're focused on what we don't want, we end up imagining a lot more of that. So if you're telling kids not to have premarital relations when they enter puberty, that's going to be the thing that they're maximally focused on. And the most disagreeable among them are going to be having the most of it and are going to be, let's say, peer pressuring the more agreeable ones. And so everyone's being told what not to do, and now everyone's going to be doing it. That's just how it goes in this sort of social contagion. We're seeing a focus on, well, men and women and their roles and what they can't be and what they can be, and further blending of that. And so there's great dysfunction, there's great confusion that is being sown. And if we focus instead on what we want rather than the problems what we don't want, well, if we don't want transgender children, well, are we teaching boys to be men? Not really. Are we teaching girls to be women? Not really. Are we giving aspirational patriarchy, aspirational matriarchy? Well, organizations like Evie Magazine are doing that with an elevation of femininity and the valorizing of motherhood as the ideal for the feminine. What about for men? Protecting, providing, preserving, prospering, the 4 big P's of masculinity. There are organizations that are doing that, certainly. And all of them, for men and for women, are right-wing coded, which is what is interesting. If you see somebody who is fit and feminine, a woman, oh yeah, she's conservative. If you see a man who is well-dressed and confident in his demeanor, oh yeah, that's a conservative. That's a right-winger. Maybe not conservative, at least new right. A populist, you might say, an American populist, nationalist. And if you look at the women of those men, they look feminine. What a wonderful world we can create. I do invite you to create it with me, because I think it's going to be worth it. You don't have to. But if you want more of what it is that you want, focus on what you want. Imagine that. Become it. Embody it. And if there's any action you take today, maybe the one action you're going to be is to, you know what? I was going to go out in a t-shirt. You know, I'm going to put on a collared shirt. I don't want to put on a shirt that's collared, right? A little more casual today. That's okay, Joshua. But maybe you can wear a collared shirt to bed. Maybe wear a collared shirt to the store when you would normally wear sweatpants and a t-shirt. Dress up a little bit more than you're used to dressing. for women and for men. If you normally go out in yoga pants, well, what would happen if you wore a dress to the supermarket? What would happen instead of wearing flats, you wore heels to church? What would happen, men, if instead of going to watch the game with the buddies, what if you just put on, instead of your t-shirt and your football themed hoodie, what would happen if you just put on a white button down and a suit jacket, threw it on over? Maybe you wore jeans, it's fine. What would happen if you wore that? Well, you would instantly look like you're in charge of the place. You would instantly be the best dressed person. And that's something I think you should aspire to for interpersonal persuasion purposes. And guess what? Your spouse and kids will take you more serious because you look like you take yourself more serious.